Good evening, everybody, or a very good afternoon, as the case may be, to our West Coast friends, and welcome to USITT Online Education and Training. My name's Christine, and I'll be your host today. Before we start with the content, I'd just like to remind you to stay in touch with the USITT.org and our website, and maybe join us Tuesdays and Thursdays for news at noon live on Facebook. So you can get minute-by-minute updates from Cody Hahn, our sales manager, about the conference, new announcements, updates, and offerings that USITT is bringing your way in the near future. But let's start with today. Today's webinar is part 1 of 3 in a series called Lessons Learned, Taking the Show Online. Today we're presenting part 1, Tech Platforms for Online Performance, which is being co-moderated by Jenn Schwartz and Jason Wells, and joined by their fellow presenters, Andy Carluccio, Eamonn Farrell, and Jared Mezzocchi. Welcome, everybody. Hey, before we get started with the content, folks, let's go round robin. Can you tell us a little bit about yourselves, and maybe somebody can offer a brief overview of what we'll be covering today? Who's up first? Jen?
Sure, I can go first. Hi, I'm Jenn Schwartz. I am the production manager at the University of Maryland in College Park. And I have been there for about 1.5 years. It's my first time at a university. Prior to that, I was a production manager at some regional theaters in DC, and I was also the general manager of a theater here. Jared, do you want to go?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Jared Mezzocchi. I'm associate professor at the MFA in Design program at University of Maryland alongside Jenn. I teach projection and multimedia design there, and I've been there for about 8 years. I'm also a multimedia director and designer freelance around the country.
I will go next. My name is Jason Wells. I'm the director of production of the Fisher Center, which is right behind me. I've been here a very short time. Before that, I was the director of production at what some people know as American Dance Institute, what other people know as Lumberyard. Before that, I was an electrician. Eamonn?
Hi, I am Eamonn Farrell. I am a freelance video designer based in Harrisonburg, Virginia, formerly Brooklyn. And I've taught projections design at Princeton and City College, and most recently at UVA as a guest lecturer.
And I'm Andy Carluccio. I am the president of Luminal Entertainment Technologies. I was the creator of the modified version of Zoom we used for Mad Forest, and I was a video programmer and broadcast engineer for a couple of productions that we've been doing these days.
Excellent. Thanks, folks, and welcome, and thanks for joining us today. Jen, I believe you're starting us off.
So today we're going to be focusing on 2 specific productions that shifted from live theatrical events to live streamed events. And as Christine mentioned, the tech and design elements that were used to support the productions. Both of these happened over a month ago, so we've learned many new things since then. So we'll also share some of the new things that we've learned or tried outside of these productions, but the main focus will be the productions themselves. So we're going to start with the UMD production. In early May, we were slated to produce a theatrical production of She Kills Monsters. And then about a week before rehearsals were to begin in March, campus closed and sent everyone home, which probably sounds familiar to many of you out there. So we quickly shifted gears to a live stream production and began planning for that, as many other people I'm sure have had to do since the pandemic. We started by recruiting 2 faculty co-directors, one of whom was Jared, so you'll get to hear from him shortly. And they decided to approach this new version of our production as a research project. The rest of the team was made up of, we had an undergraduate assistant director, 5 designers, 4 of whom were, and still are, some of them, are MFA design students. We had a 3-person undergraduate stage management team, an intimacy choreographer, and 19 undergraduate actors. Thanks to Jared's relationship with the playwright, Kui, we were able to work directly with him to develop a Zoom version of the script that was unique to our production, which is really exciting. And in fact, since then, Kui has published a Zoom adaptation of his script. So if anyone's interested in checking that out, you can find that. Our entire performance was done live in Zoom. Nothing was pre-recorded, and it was a one-time only event, so we got one chance at it. which was scary and exciting. We streamed through livestream.com and Facebook Live, and we ended up with just under 4,000 views and reached 10 countries around the world, which was a really exciting thing to learn. So that is my brief overview. I'm going to let Jared talk about what you all really want to hear about, which is the technology. So Jared, go for it.
Awesome, guys. So yeah, as Jen said, I can't reiterate enough, everything that was done in the piece from start to finish was completely live. That was one of our challenges as a research project, was how can we produce a highly designed performance within the confines of Zoom and any technology that can come into Zoom. We pushed away any ideas of pre-recorded, not because of lack of interest, but just as a research project, what can be done if it's 100% live. For those who don't know She Kills Monsters, I think it's important to name. She Kills Monsters is a play by Qui Wen, a drama comedy. It tells the story of Agnes Evans, who is an average woman who loses her parents and little sister Tilly in a car accident early on in her life. Having been very distant from her sister while she was alive, Agnes embarks in an adventure to get to know her sister better by playing a Dungeons and Dragons module that Tilly had written, and discovers things that she had never imagined. So the play takes place between a reality and a fantasy world, and which is a great opportunity to toggle between two different aesthetics inside a performance piece. Technically speaking, we did not leave Zoom. We used Zoom non-webinar, just Zoom standard as a platform. We only used OBS as a platform to basically crop and shrink down to the necessary frames within Zoom. Though later finding out Live Studio 6 is what we used to simulcast out. Live Studio had the ability to crop. So in a way, we didn't need to use OBS. We could have gone Zoom straight to Live Studio. A lot of the things that we did technically inside Zoom was use a software called Snap Camera. At the time, it wasn't really known. It's now pretty well established out there. Snap Camera is it's like Snapchat, and it basically allows you to do the typical weird Snapchat filters live. It's a great tracking device. It is really well suited for tracking. And we found out through this, Lens Studio is the software that is used to establish all of these Snap Camera filters. And so what we did was, through Lens Studio, we created SKM filters, which were all of our characters. So all of my students, these are all designed in Photoshop and then placed through Lens Studio to track the eyes. This is designed by Kiana Vincenti and Taylor Verrett, two MFA students. Through this, we then were able to create favorites and create our cue list for each actor. You can create a hotkey for each of these. So some of the actors were able to create one through, the QWERTY row of keys to create hotkeys so that they could basically walk through the show. Technically helpful was in this chat feature on Zoom, our stage managers were able to place every scene and what was the next filter so that the actors could look at that. Technically inside, I'm going to show a series of pictures. We were exploring, as you can see here, we were exploring cinematic frame features. I toured Big Art Group who did a lot of real-time cinema, is what they term it as. And real-time cinema is just looking at, even though the camera cannot move, how can the bodies move in space to simulate camera movement? So we were looking at frame lines. This is Agnes and Tilly together on two different Zooms, but we used an overlay in Snap Camera to make it feel like it was a unified spread across. That's a foreground use of Snap Camera. Snap Camera works, or Lens Studio works in a foreground, mask work, and background. So the pictures I'm about to show you are foreground, mask, and background. We did not use virtual background inside Zoom. We kept it all unified inside Snap Camera. That also allowed us for backgrounds in the reality to create a blended frame basically of a background that looks like they are both in a guidance counselor office. We gave stage or frame right to one actor and frame left to another actor. So when they put it together, it looks like the frame, the background is a one singular background for them to perform in. We took a photo and then in Photoshop zoomed it in, cropped it to 50%, and then made it into snap camera backgrounds. As you saw in what I was doing earlier, we had mask work as well as foreground for Dungeons and Dragons login screens and background. A technical thing that we discovered in this, as you will see, when very still, these scenes in the guidance counselor's office were sitting at a desk. The backgrounds were fine, but as I'm sure some of you have discovered, let me actually go back to Lens Snap Camera and go here. So with this background, it's really janky in a lot of ways. And so that becomes really problematic if you're doing a lot of stuff and all of a sudden your hands disappear and all the theatricality goes out the window. For the reality scenes, we made sure that the acting was fairly static so that they could just communicate like this and we could have a full 100% background. But in the virtual reality Dungeons and Dragons world, we put the backgrounds at about 50 to 60% opacity so that if it disappears, your hands are still evident there, so your imagination can actually connect the piece and your hands don't disappear. We tried it 3 different ways. One was 100% and hands would disappear. We tried backgrounds at nothing. We didn't do backgrounds for a run through, and we felt like everyone was just in their bedroom, obviously. And so to say that we were in swamps and forests and stuff was really problematic there. And then when we put it at 50%, I found my mind's eye was kind of filling in the blanks, and it actually encouraged theatricality in a lot of ways. So for what it's worth, as we are in this world where things are kind of muddy around the edges, this was a great solution to that. Also, going back to these, we also did frame breaks where the actors themselves would choke themselves, and then we would align another performer to line up with them. We were using spike tape on desks so that we could know exactly where to go, and it wasn't this like, where is the lineup? So we would have objects that they would go and grab, and that would encourage the kind of the line of physicality to work out. We would also have spike tape on our screens so that we could kind of line up where the image was as well. We also had different positions. Position 1 was extreme close-up. Position 2 was medium shot. Position 3. So there was a vocabulary there that you'll see throughout each of these.
Jared,
yeah.
there was a question about OBS. Can you just talk a little bit about what that is quickly?
Sure, and you're actually calling me out on what OBS stands for. It's online broadcasting software.
Open broadcaster software.
Open broadcasting software. It's a free download, and OBS is it's basically like a live mix board online, and you can snag windows, you can snag your camera grab, you could put images in, you could put movies in, and it's basically a mixing board so that you can crossfade to different things. It's also a great way to take your Zoom and multiply it out. Right now, I'd multiply 5 grabs of Zoom and crop it to each of us, so then I can manipulate where those frames are in space, which is very helpful. Cool, yeah. Thanks, Jen. Continuing down, so this was a frame break that we called it. We also had multi-plane character development. We had a gelatinous cube at the bottom, and this is 3 different actors, one being a hand, and one being the face. And that would become one long triple framed gelatinous cube so that they could take over as a monster. So that was fun to create a Frankenstein character out of that was stuck inside a cube. but those are 3 different actors performing this one character. So we were using a lot of puppeteer language in rehearsal of just understanding hands and how they breathe together and that sort of thing. We also, and I'll get to this in a sec too, with the video, we also ensured that if we were to, we would say, let's clean the performance space, and everyone would turn off their videos and then turn them on one by one to create a strategic order of frames. Even though it seems as though it's chaotic in Zoom, there is an order to the madness. And that is literally, if everybody's cameras are off and you turn them on one by one by one by one, they turn on in that order. There is complications with that, as you yourself are a viewer or performer, because that is always placed as the second or first frame, even though to a viewer it's different. So I was not performing, so I was always explaining to our performers what the layout was on my end. This allowed us to be able to look at each other, know exactly where everyone was in their own frames, and find relationship there.
Can I just say that one way, Jared, which is,
yeah.
If you can go in a specific order of entry, you will always have the boxes in the same place on the screen that the person is viewing, which allows you to be able to figure out where they need to look to interact together.
Exactly. And I'm going to show a clip to show our strategies towards that, because if it's one layout at the end of a scene and it needs to be a different layout on the next scene, that could take like 5 to 10 seconds and really, kill the pace and energy of the piece. So we did a couple of things, and I'm going to show a video of what we did there. We were able to use backgrounds to black out the background, so it was something floating in space that really made it a singular frame look. So this is someone fighting boss number 6, which is Eye of the Beholder. And this is a snap camera filter that we made, and basically just placed the mouth of the person in it. And then finally, just to show off some of what we were doing inside the snap camera, we were doing a lot of 2D animation that was tracking, but we also did, for the very end of the piece, the final dragon that they had to fight was really dealing with grief of the piece and the loss of her sister, and so we wanted it much more dynamic and dangerous, and so we made a 3D dragon mask, and when you open your mouth, it breathes fire. One thing to note is in Snap Camera, once you open Snap Camera inside your video, on stop video on your video settings, Snap Camera comes up as an optional camera to select. So right now I am what my Snap Camera is. So it's an immediate drop into Zoom, which is really great. And so we can create just what we need in our effects. And Snap Camera's open, so I can be toggling between all of my cues that I need in Snap Camera, and it's immediately flipping to Zoom. Where am I?
So, really quickly, yeah. I've seen that there's a bunch of people that just got on for some reason. We're not going to be able to recap everything right now, but I think this is being recorded. I'm not sure, so maybe you can get it that way. Maybe Christine can help us there. But what we're talking about right now is the University of Maryland's production of She Kills Monsters that was live streamed. And Jared was just demonstrating how we were using Snap Camera to create characters and locations and things like that. So apologies to those of you who are needing to get caught up. Sorry, Jared, go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah, totally. One other thing, this isn't tech, but this is paperwork tech. We did create, our costume designer created basically a French scene plot, but of all the Snap Camera filters. So it's all of our character names and then every scene. And it became a really helpful tool for us to update what we needed throughout the show. And allow for all of our actors to kind of stay up to date of what they needed. One thing to note about Snap Camera that's really helpful is once it's uploaded as SKM Woods, for instance, in Lens Studio, I can make updates and then update it up to the Snap Camera, and it still remains SKM Woods. So we were able to do a lot of updates through each of our final rehearsals, and the actors didn't need to change what they were finding or research for new Snap Camera filters. It was just simply updating the next time it was used. So that was a really helpful consistency for the actors. The last thing is just talking about our transitions. We ended up using, when we needed to have one frame layout at the end of a scene and then another frame layout at the beginning of the next scene, we ended up putting in these kind of like Austin Powers transitions that allowed for the whole ensemble to come on and dance. And as they danced, our actors in the next scene would pop in the right order, but it would seem chaotic because there was like 20 people dancing. And then when the 20 people dancing turned off their cameras, it would then sync up to the right order of the people remaining. And so I'm just going to show about 30 seconds of that sequence here. The Dungeons and Dragons is, we wanted it to be this kind of handmade kids in their bedroom thing. So I'm showing you a rehearsal clip, but there's like a shield made out of cardboard, which is intentional and really fun to look at. So here we go.
My friends, I cannot ask all of you to come with me. The journey before us is too perilous, and the price too personal for me to expect you to risk your lives.
Tilius, you know that you will always have my blade.
And mine.
Seriously, I'm totally fine with just chilling.
You don't get a choice.
Man.
What about you, Agnes? What say you?
Of course I'm in.
Good. Then let us kick it some ass.
So our team of adventurers set forth into the wild, following the path Orcus traced out for them. It was indeed treacherous, and they did indeed kicketh ass.
Everybody was kung fu fighting. Those kids were fast as lightning. In fact, it was a little bit frightening. But they fought with expert timing. There were funky Chinamen from funky China. Aw, look, it's a little forest fairy. Hey there, fairy, how are you?
Wham!
Ow! What are you doing?
Cool. Cool. So just a quick little rehearsal through a transition there, which you didn't really see us strategizing some of our actors turning on their cameras inside of that. But by the time the music ended, they were in the right order and our fairy was in the middle. To simulate. So that really allowed for no like lights out, scene change for 3 minutes, and then lights up. We were able to kind of have some fun with that. We did use QLab. I'm just trying to think of all the like lingering things that I haven't brought up. We use QLab and we're able to share screen, just audio on Zoom. And when you do that, you have Zoom audio device output that you can find in QLab, and then that syncs it up. And so right now, just really quickly, I'm gonna turn on some music. When you do that and sync it up as a share screen of audio, it ends up being, let me just turn this on. I still have a clean audio track here while there's audio underneath it as a sound bed, which is a really important thing because as we're all learning inside Zoom, when multiple people talk, there's clipping that happens. But when this is tracked through as a separate audio track, which is in share screen, it has a nice clean audio bed to it so that actors can continue to perform without competing with the audio, which is important. And QLab was great for that because then you can create all of your levels as opposed to being inside iTunes or Spotify or something. And but that does require just a settings attachment to Zoom audio output in QLab.
So there's a lot of questions about what did actors do versus technicians and who was running everything.
Cool.
We are doing a couple other webinars about this that get a little more into detail in terms of process and how actors were involved in that process. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds on that right now, but I will say that one of our ASMs ran audio for us through the screen share, so that was the way they got involved. And our stage manager did call some cues, and again, like we can talk more about this in detail in a couple of the future webinars. So I think we talked earlier about controlling the order of the frames. I'm sorry for anybody who missed it, but hopefully you'll see the video and you can go back. I think that pretty much covers questions about our section of things. So I want to make sure we have time to talk about Mad Forest. The one last thing, Jared, was captioning. Do you want to really quickly just talk about how we did captioning for our production?
Yeah, because we found out like the week of that captioning was a mandate. So we kind of were trying to figure out how to make that work pretty quickly. We had captioning inside Zoom that then was output with the Zoom performance. The challenge with that was that you can't really dictate where that captioning exists. And so what I did was, that actually is the one thing we did in OBS. We caught our frames as one thing, and then I caught the captioning as another output so that I could zoom it. And on one fight sequence, we pushed it to the top because of what was happening at the bottom of the frame. So I was able to kind of mess with that. Our live captioning was a live caption, closed captioning typer inside Zoom. So she was inside Zoom with us, and she came to a rehearsal beforehand, practiced, and then did it live with us. So yeah, does that answer that question, Jen?
Yeah, it does. I just wanted to know because I know that that's a big question.
The one big lesson before I hand it off is, and the reason why our rehearsal video is much cleaner than our performance video, we hit up against a snag that was totally unexpected on our performance night, which was not the amount of people viewing the live stream, but the amount of people inside each performer's household that chose to view it that night over other nights. And I say that because that's something that we couldn't have rehearsed prior. We had no idea that that would have been an issue, but bandwidth is so fragile, and each of the performers up until final dress was performing at 9:30 at night, and their family was not watching anything on their computers. But the night of the performance, several families actually they found it awesome to be able to each open up their own computer to have a private viewing. So suddenly this performer who had a clean bandwidth, even on a hard wire, suddenly was competing against 6 other laptops and an iPhone pulling from the same bandwidth. And it made for several different moments of lag. So that's just a really important thing. Something later that I have discovered in other projects is if you have a 2 or 3 or guest line, that is very helpful on your Wi-Fi, just to have clean different routes of bandwidth. Or if you can, my partner who lives here with me had Verizon send its own individual Wi-Fi station that is its own clean thing, and then that solved everything. So that it has a price point to it, but that does solve that issue very quickly. Something to think about.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that covers everything. So thanks, Jared. And Jason, take it away.
Hey, thanks. That was awesome. I'm really glad that I got a chance to see a piece of that. Thank you, Jared and Jen. And also, I'm really, just really excited to be part of this, especially since what She Kills Monsters and what Mad Forest did. We're kind of taking 2 different sort of techniques or ways of doing it, but both ending up at the same place, which was a really, really strong production that gave all of our students a really great experience. So so anybody who sort of knows me or has ever worked with me knows that I have a tendency to ramble a little bit. So I decided to write down my thoughts, so I didn't do that. So if full disclosure, I am reading this. I am not coming off this with the top of my head. So Mad Forest was our spring main stage academic performance. So for these types of shows, we hired a professional creative team to work with the student cast and crew. So we had hired a lighting designer, set designer, a professional stage manager, professional sound designer, And then we had 12 students in the cast, and we had several students as ASMs. And so we had done about 3 weeks of rehearsals when it became clear that we would have to close down the Fisher Center. Like Jen said, this is like a refrain that we've all had to say, unfortunately, in the past couple of months. So we were also pretty far into the build as well. So the last in-person rehearsal was March 14th, and then we had our first Zoom rehearsal on March 17th. And that quick turnaround is really due to the passion of Ashley Tata, who is the director of Mad Forest, and Gideon Lester, who's the Fisher Center's artistic director and the head of the theater and performance department. They really wanted to attempt to keep the show going. And also, honestly, we were able to jump online so quickly and really to do the whole show in the way it was done because we brought first Eamonn on, who was not part of the original design team, and then later brought Andy on, and obviously let them speak for themselves. But and Ashley and Gideon and really the whole design team wanted to try to give the students as close to the experience that they would have had performing in a theater. So we sent all 12 actors props, costumes, lights, earbuds, and each one got a small green screen. A couple other stats for you. We did one live stream performance on April 10th after 3 weeks of Zoom rehearsals. After that, it was so successful, the Theater for a New Audience reached out to see if we'd be able to remount it, which we were able to do. So we did another week of rehearsing, which wasn't enough, but we'll discuss that in another webinar. And then we did 3 additional performances. So if we had done, we were planning on doing 5 shows at the Fisher Center, and the theater we were in holds around 250 to 15 people. And we had 5 rehearsals. So, it's a little over 1,000 people would have seen this show. And I'm sure that the same thing goes with She Kills Monsters, but it goes to talking about accessibility and the way that theater can maybe now reach to people that didn't usually have access to it. Over 9,000 people at some point saw the show, saw Mad Forest. It was recorded. The original production was recorded, but we had a limit as to how long we could have it on. And then the 3 productions we did at Tofana were not recorded, unfortunately, due to rights issues. Someone's saying they're having trouble hearing me. Is that the case for everyone? Eamonn and Andy, are you hearing me? Okay. And then finally, I'll just say this. I've actually only been at the Fisher Center since like mid-January. So this was actually the first show I production managed from start to finish there. And I really couldn't be more proud of the work that we did. The whole team, the cast, the administration, the box office, for everyone, because we really did, and again, like She Kills Monsters did the same thing. We really did give these students the best experience we possibly could, and we really were, honestly, I think, we provided a bit of light in the midst of real dark time, and both for ourselves, for the cast, for the crew, for the designers, and obviously for the audience. So I will now hand it off to the very capable hands of Andy and Eamonn. They're both going to they're going to go through their own a little bit, and we'll talk later.
Thanks, Jason.
Eamonn. Yep.
All right, so I am Eamonn Farrell. I'm the video designer of Mad Forest, and I'm not going to be sharing my screen a lot. I'm leaving that to Andy when we get to the nuts and bolts of it, but I will be posting a lot of links into the chat as we go along. So as I said, I'm a video designer. I had worked with Ashley Tata previously on a few productions, and I guess I've been interested in the intersection of like live performance and the internet for a long time, and have been sort of tracking the technologies as they've developed. Like back in the early 2000s, I remember working with this programmer on this very prototypical video streaming program that he had developed himself, and we like streamed a show, and it was, all of 10 people who downloaded, the viewer on the other side could watch it. And then I remember when Skype came out with my company in 2007, we did a production where we actually Skyped this fan of ours who was in Arizona into the production. And that's when I realized that like the internet can just be another video feed, like any other video feed that we work with in video design. And when you think about it that way, I think it opens up the possibilities for what can be done using the skills that we have as video designers for live performance. Then it's just for me, it was like a sort of small leap to what it is to take a whole production online. So, so what happened was, let me see where to start the story. So I was developing this project with my company, Anonymous Ensemble, and I put the link into the chats. And in it, we envisioned bringing people from all over the world into a live production via Zoom. And we had this idea for this show for a couple of years. And then when we discovered Zoom, we were like, okay, here's a platform that's actually robust enough to do what we envisioned. So in 2018, we started developing the show, and we went into workshops in the fall of 2018 and in our studio in Brooklyn, and started to play with streaming technologies. And I'm going to go through a little bit of the history of that because I think it helps to understand how we got to the place of Mad Forest with a bunch of links. So I use Isadora as my primary platform. I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with it. It's just video, live video programming software that you can deal with clips, you can deal with live feeds, you can deal with sound, though I don't really do that much in Isadora. And it also has a lot of functionality for OSC, which is Open Sound Control. Oh, I should have had a link for that, but which is, you know, like MIDI, which is another much older protocol that you can use to communicate between different software. So, so we were developing this show using Zoom, zooming people in from Europe and Asia and Africa. And Andy is actually my student at UVA, my former student. He just graduated, believe it or not. And he's done some programming for my company in the past. And I was saying, we were getting ready to go to spring break. And I had mentioned to Andy that it would be amazing if we had OSC, if we could get OSC control of Zoom. And, you know, because using the Spotlight feature, because prior to that, my company had been using Zoom in the live broadcast with me, like literally just like, you know, toggling Spotlight. You know, can I spotlight somebody on this? Yeah. I'm going to spotlight Andy. So I just spotlight Andy. I'm spotlighting Jared, and now I'm going to spotlight myself again. Oh, now we'll have to unspotlight me in order to go back to let Zoom do its thing. So I actually had another student of mine who was a lab student doing the spotlighting for one of my productions live in the show, Spotlighting. And I asked Andy if he thought that maybe he could come up with a modification of Zoom that would allow us to spotlight people and then put it into the video programming. And Andy, right before spring break, the day before spring break, Andy came to me and he was like, I think I'm gonna have some time over spring break to maybe work on that Zoom modification. And I was like, okay, Anonymous Ensemble has no money to pay you, but that would be amazing if you could do that. We'll definitely use it. We'll demo it for you. So, and then the pandemic hit, and I saw Bard's post that they were moving Mad Force online, and I contacted Ashley and I was like, that's amazing. I was like, I think that's great that you all are moving forward with the production. I've been doing a lot of online stuff. If you need any help, like, you know, I figured out some of the streaming stuff and some of how to integrate video into it. Let me know if you need help. And she wrote back and she was like, actually, we don't have anyone doing that. I'm going to see if Bard can hire you. So they did. And Ashley and I started having meetings and talking about what she wanted to do. And at first they were thinking like, we would just do it in a Zoom, you know, in a Zoom meeting like this. And I said, well, you know, with my company, we've been working with Zoom, but much more like thinking of it as a video mixer. And I think you can really like aim higher. You can try to think of this project a little bit more filmically, but also retaining its liveness. So she was like, yes, let's do it. And she jumped in and we were bouncing ideas around. I texted Andy and I was like, so that Zoom modification that you're maybe going to work on, can we get it by Monday? He texted me back, how about Wednesday? And I think he did have it by like, the Friday of our first week of rehearsal. So what that does, and Andy's going to get much more into this, but that allows us to actually have an operator control Zoom and, just hit buttons and trigger who gets spotlit at any given time. And so that's what, and a lot of the work of putting Mad Forest together was like troubleshooting that and also figuring out what the techniques are to actually work with that technology and this medium and how to make it a really live thing. So we worked with a stage manager, and I guess you're going to do another webinar where you get really into like the nitty gritty of like calling cues and all of that stuff. But a big part of it,
roles too, and how roles have changed. And there's a question in the thing about costume designers, and and that obviously like people's roles definitely were similar, but also very.
So a lot of that was us figuring out how to decentralize things. So we discovered that like somebody could run QLab and share the audio, as Jared talked about. And as a video designer, one of my big tasks was like how to create this into all these different feeds into an aesthetic whole. And so what Ashley and I talked about was creating looks for each act and sort of and running all of the video feeds through filters so that we could kind of bring all the different performers with their own systems into the same world. So like, and for me, it was a matter of like pushing the effects until I got to a place where everybody's different feeds, like their wildly different camera types, felt unified, and versus like making it sort of so blurry and difficult to discern. So like figuring out what that sweet spot was for all of them. And then we also did have to deal with, different internet connections that everybody had. And Jason did a great job of like getting, Ethernet cables to everybody and getting green screens to everybody. And our lighting designer lit for the green screens in each room. So we did like these studio visits where we had the tech team there with each performer. And it was really about empowering that performer to in some ways be like their own tech crew in a lot of ways. They had to set their lights and get the levels right and the distances and do the staging with their laptops and the camera work with their laptops and move their laptops around, and really working to feel them and for them to feel that they were empowered to create their own like performance worlds in their little rooms, and then also to connect with each other. So I think I need to hand it over to Andy, but feel free to ask questions about the specifics of the technology as we go on. We use a lot of the same things that Jared used. We used OBS as a streaming platform. I also use something called, for my own company, I use something called Caster.io, which is a restreaming service. And I use Soundflower to get this is on a Mac. I use Soundflower, which is like a virtual audio router within Mac. The PC has a similar, what's it called? It's called virtual audio cable, right, Andy? I don't have a link for that, but that's just a way to get the Zoom sound into OBS. And then I usually monitor it out of OBS using the difficult to find monitor feature, which is a little like settings thing next to the actual mic. And then in terms of platforms, we played with Facebook. We streamed to Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo. Vimeo didn't work out so well. Then we ended up with IBM.com, which was pretty stellar. It's pretty expensive. but we did that for the Tufana show. And my own company has moved on to Twitch. We're trying to make that our main streaming platform because it's really, it's the most robust. I think it's really built for streaming. And we've actually embedded that now, a Twitch stream into our own website, which gives it a nice clean look and we have control over it. So, all right, I'm going to turn it over to Andy now.
Thanks, Eamonn. Appreciate that. So yes, I'm Andy. I'm from Liminal Entertainment Technologies, as we're calling it, and I worked on the custom Zoom integration, the OSC mod for Zoom, the expanded version of the client. And I did some video engineering for Mad Forest. When we transferred to Tufana, the show actually came to me to broadcast from my premise. So Eamonn has shared a little bit with you about how that pipeline worked on macOS, and I'm on a Windows-based workflow, so I'll be able to share a little bit more about that other perspective. I'm going to post the website address for my company in the chat. There's a contact form on there that we've created specifically for USITT, where if you fill that out, we'll get in touch with you and talk about if you want to use the software or whatever it is, we'll find an appointment with you and we'll get in touch. So before I get too into it, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm also going to share my audio. Just a second. All right. Great, that's on. And let's take a look.
Rays of light, we're moving through the night. With destiny in our sights, we've got to fight. Through all the rain, we're masking all our pain to take what still remains of our lives. Within, we've justified our sin, and we're gonna take you on a ride till we find answers within. Location not here, in shadows we all disappear. Hold on, switch gears, we're gone as fast as we appeared.
So at the end there, you saw a couple other productions that followed Mad Forest. My company's been involved with Moliere in the Park, as well as a student production down at UVA, children's theater show in a rural part of Virginia. And we're actually returning for another show with Moliere in the Park, Tartuffe, which is coming up, and I'll encourage you to check that out. And we're producing a festival in July at Cape Cod Theater Project. So it's been a pretty busy period using the Zoom OSC mod. So let me talk a little bit more specifically about what that is. So when Eamonn approached me, the goals for the modified version of the Zoom client was to integrate with the media server pipeline that video designers are already used to using, to give them control and reliability in using that platform, and to allow the performers to do as little as possible and let the media server take on as much of the work as can be. So at a very fundamental level, what Zoom OSC is a integration of OSC into Zoom, and it's a bidirectional bridge. So you can send OSC data from your media server to Zoom to do things like set the spotlight, turn someone's video on or off, mute or unmute, and build in the reverse pipeline reactive programming. So there's this great panel discussion at USITT last year. Some of you may have attended about nonlinear programming, and that really stuck with me. And so when I built this software, I wanted to make sure that our designs could really capitalize on that. So because Zoom OSC will send you events, you can build reactions to people turning their video on or off, muting or unmuting their audio. And then really what's super exciting to me in this latest update is the ability to ask Zoom for data, like what is the order of the gallery right now, or how many people have their video on, and get metrics about that, because you can use that to do things like not worry about what order people turn their video on, and just be able to map reliably no matter where they are, they'll always be in the right place. So this sort of leads to a pipeline that we're using for Zoom OSC based shows where, you know, like I said, you have that bidirectional OSC bridge between your media server like Isadora or QLab and Zoom, allowing you to set active view and gallery view, the spotlight, whatever it is, and then also to get that data back from Zoom. You do a video capture of that, and then you bring it into the media server. That video capture can be done with OBS or other frame capturing tools. And you can either just put overlays on that and send it out. You can do, you know, segment up the frame and put people in different places, put them in circles instead of squares, you know, whatever design choices you want to make that you already are used to using as a projection designer. Those tools are still available to you when you use Zoom OSC. Then you take the result of what Isadora created and you take that aggregate and send it off to your encoder like vMix or OBS. And those will send it out to your remote audience, you know, on Facebook Live or YouTube or IBM Video in the case of Mad Forest, or Twitch if you're for Flight. And this sort of creates a pipeline that lets you get the same video for everybody out to your audience without having to bring them all into Zoom and worry about reliability concerns like that. So we try to give you both speed and control. So there are hundreds of camera cues in Mad Forest. You know, the majority of the time you're not watching the person who's speaking. You know, Zoom sort of defaults to allowing you to follow the, you know, the active speaker. But using the spotlight, right, you can set it to anybody. And then with the automation on the spotlight, you can really create this non-linear or linear control surface. It's totally up to you, and you can do it very quickly and at great scale. You can also have multiple operators at once. So Mad Forest had 4 different Zoom OSC operators at once. We had Sean, who was our kind of main cameraman, who learned a cue list and was following that kind of autonomously through the show. Then we had Ashley, the director, who live mixed the second act of the show because it was improvisational, and she was responding to what the performers were doing in real time in a non-linear, non-prepared sort of way. And then I was marrying Zoom OSC with Isadora directly to be able to have certain video effects married to camera cues so they could both land at the same time. And then Eamonn actually had in the remount a backup of Zoom OSC running so that if any of us went down, he would be able to step in and continue the show, which I think, you know, that's really important to have that backup operation in a decentralized sort of performance environment. It also gives you this aesthetic flexibility, right? So if you can ask Zoom what the order of the gallery is, you can program your show so it doesn't matter where they are. And you can use, you know, the fact that you can have the spotlight and the gallery up simultaneously to pull in that HD video of the spotlight user while being able to manage the, you know, the compressed video in the gallery. And you can react to all of it in real time without having to do too much preparation. Something that's coming down the pipeline at Liminal is what we're calling Streamweaver. So while Zoom, especially with the OSC mod, is really helpful and it allows you to do a lot of things that you couldn't do in a sort of professional or in a, you know, in a prepared environment, what Streamweaver is really targeting is to be a end-to-end solution for online performance. So we do run into some barriers with Zoom, such as, you know, bandwidth cutting in on us. We had to hold for 7 minutes on the closing night of Mad Forest because Zoom arbitrarily and without warning just chopped our bandwidth. And Zoom also requires the actors to do a lot of heavy lifting in participating in how the performance aesthetically comes together. So what Streamweaver is going to do is it's going to give you individual NDI video feeds of all of your performers. And NDI is a protocol that's used in live entertainment and in broadcast to be able to send video on your local network. We'll also be able to send DMX and PTZ data, so you'll be able to control remote lights and remote cameras, robotic cameras in your performers' studios. So that'll give you even more flexibility. You'll control your own bandwidth if you have a Streamweaver server module, so you won't be dependent on the randomness of the cloud infrastructure. And you'll also be able to integrate with physical cameras if, you know, God willing, we get to a world where maybe first we can get our performers together, but not necessarily our remote audience. Streamweaver will let you integrate cameras in your theater and broadcast it out, or mix in some performers remote and some in place. And we're launching a beta for Streamweaver this summer with an official release in time for your fall production seasons. And so we encourage you to sign up at liminalet.com to get more information on pricing and availability for Streamweaver. A couple last things, just some quick tips for online performance. If you have access to the NVEC encoder, which means you have an NVIDIA graphics card in your computer that is, I think, available on the 10 series and the 20 series cards and the 16 series cards, you have access to something called NVEC, which is a GPU-based encoder that essentially lets you encode your show and stream it for free in terms of processing power. If you're trying to encode the live stream on the same chip that is also encoding your video effects, you're gonna melt the computer if you get too crazy with your programming. So if you have access to NVEC, you should definitely use it because it makes your life so much easier. We've mentioned a little bit, but give careful thought to your distribution platform. There's random copyright takedowns on YouTube that are just bots randomly taking streams down for no reason whatsoever. There's a high click away on Facebook and YouTube because it's kind of a social platform that's encouraging you to look towards other content. So you might see that your audience kind of comes and goes. We've had really terrible video playback on Vimeo, some client-side problems that weren't obvious to solve. And then there's sort of IBM, which solves a lot of those problems, but also introduces a pay-per-view model. So you kind of need to think a little bit about where you're going to end up, and that's really part of the aesthetic process of the show as well. It's also important to have not necessarily the best individual performance of every actor and their equipment, but to have the most unified version of it. So maybe somebody's sound sounds better on their headset than on their built-in mic, but if you kind of have to gate yourself based on the lowest member, so you have a unified aesthetic, and that can really be helpful in a lot of situations. Consider alternatives to webcams. I'm joining on a DSLR right now. Canon released USB drivers for the Rebel cameras that you can just hook up your Rebel camera, no capture card required, and use it like a webcam. And that's super helpful if you have one of those lying around. You can also use control surfaces like a Stream Deck. I use that in all of my shows, and it's super helpful. And then note that, while Zoom virtual backgrounds are cool, they tend to flatten things a little bit, and they're not always the best at, keying. So the idea that that University of Maryland proposed was really, really cool about that 50%. But there's a couple other things you can do too, thinking about keying in the media server or doing it somewhere else in the chain. And then lighting, we talk so much about resolution of cameras, but that's ultimately not the driving factor of the quality video feed, especially when it's being transmitted over the internet. Good color composition, if you have a really HD video of a compressed, and grainy, choppy stream, it's not going to look as good as a lower resolution video with better lighting and better color. So you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons on both ends. And like I said, we're at Liminal, we're happy to talk you through any of these questions, liminalet.com/contact. And with that, I will stop my screen share and turn it back over to Jason.
Thank you so much, Andy and Eamonn and Jared. Again, I'm really glad that, again, I just think this, for me at least, going through this process was really kind of enlightening about the power that theater and art has, and especially the community. I mean, I was literally calling up people who I'd known from another world who lived in a town that potentially had a cable that I could maybe get to a performer,
and a dongle.
And the dongle, which was the hard part. But anyhow, so I think this is great that we're able to share this experience. I feel like that Lori has a really great question maybe to kick us off, and that is, if you had no professionals involved, how could you have done these shows with undergraduates? And so, Jared, you want to take that first?
Yeah, I'd love to. Because that was a huge question for us from the get-go, and it actually was very helpful that Lisa Nathans, my co-director, was coming from performance and had very minimal background in performance technology, and it actually ended up being a really helpful tool for both of us to interrogate each other's knowledge to make sure that we were giving the most robust experience to the undergrads. As is the case with Big Art Group, the group that I worked with for several years, they, from day one in the read-through, get as much tech in that room as possible and make it as comfortable for the performers as possible, even if you don't have all the answers. And so we discovered Lens Studio, Snap Camera, and one of the reasons why I said, let's just stop at Zoom, because there's more than enough of an abyss of unknowns inside Zoom. If we were to stick to just that, then everyone in that room, undergrads and faculty and creative team involved, know Zoom. So cool, let's start there. And we just made sure that every step along the way, the questions were answered not for the individual, but for the group. And we also opened up every rehearsal and closed every rehearsal with technical discoveries. So even our ensemble, who might not have used certain filters, were knowledgeable about how to use it, so that we were educating everyone along the way, which actually brought out amazing things in our final rehearsals, because those actors in note sessions be like, hey, by the way, I looked this up and here's an option for this. So suddenly we all became very knowledgeable in it. That's a very important aspect to what we were doing. I definitely have a breadth of knowledge that was helpful to it, but we were trying to make sure that, you can find most answers on Google and if you do the right kind of search. And so we were just trying to tool our students with the kinds of terms that you should be searching and investigating together. So, yeah.
Andy or Eamonn, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to address that a little bit too. Like, I think like my students at UVA, when the lockdown happened, all of their projects went online into a Zoom format, and they took to it so quickly and much more easily than I think like fully grown adult artists would. and I think that I personally feel that universities are going to pioneer this new direction that live performance is going in, and that it, like, I felt that it should be going in for a long time, that theater is kind of ignored. And the students are very fast. Like they learn it really quickly, and they think in this medium, I think in a much more native way.
And then another question was about accessibility. And Jared, you had responded. Did you want to? Somebody had asked about how we dealt with cyber segregation, and maybe Eamonn had sort of answered the second question, which was sort of how did you deal with computer literacy? But I know you had answered that. So Jared, did you want to?
Yeah, we spent our first 5 rehearsals doing tech know-how, like that didn't even have to do with the narrative of the piece, and just being like, let's all, just like I would with a video op as a projection designer, like set up a pre-show checklist from day one that feels like fight choreography of like, let's do everything very, very slowly. Let's all turn off our computers, turn on our computers, and just come on to Zoom alone. Cool. Now let's do that again. But turn on Snap Camera before that. Now let's turn on Snap Camera after that. Let's notice together what the bandwidth and processing powers of everything are. I knew some of those answers prior to, but it was helpful for all of us to experience that, to demystify the fear, because to answer a question that you're probably going to answer in a separate webinar, on our end, all of our actors were the ones flipping through all of the Snap cameras, and they were the ones turning on and off. I think that there are pros and cons to that, and there are pros and cons to having an operator. There's a lot of pros to having an operator turning on and off. The plus side for us was that allowed every actor involved to be able to handle the operation of the piece, and therefore actually have the confidence to perform through it and understand how to troubleshoot. So we also, before, like we would stretch at the beginning of every rehearsal if we were in the same space, we would do technical stretches and calisthenics at the beginning of every rehearsal, while also having a breakout room available with a couple of my technical students. Should someone be having an issue, we could be like, okay, hop over to that breakout room and just like mess with it. If you don't have an answer, report back of what you explored, and then we can keep going with it. But we always tackled it. We never said let's deal with it later, because there was just no time. But I think that ends up being a helpful open sourced understanding of everything. When something goes wrong, it might be a very simple thing, but if the actor is not aware of that being a simple thing, it can really tailspin really quickly, and then the narrative, the energy, everything can kind of peak in anxiety. So it's important to me that everyone knows if there's a small error happening, that's not the end of the world. And the only way to do that is to address it as a team, as an ensemble, just like you would with stretching at the beginning of a rehearsal.
They all have very different levels of computers, different availability for Wi-Fi and technology and all of that. and we had to embrace it like that. And so I think the difference in technology also drove the decision for some of the things that we chose to do. Right, Jared, like some snap cameras went to work universally. There were other ones.
I think we're having a little issue with your sound right now, Jen. Sorry.
You are, but I did understand everything you said. If you go to your audio and flip it to same as system instead of built-in, or flip it between built-in and same as system, that might toggle what's going on.
Is that better?
Much better.
Okay. Look, I just demonstrated exactly what Jared did in rehearsals with his students. So you're welcome. No, all I was saying is to tag on to what Jared said, we embraced the idea that these students all had different levels of technology, different types of computers. Some were 4 years old, some were brand new. Sorry if you can hear my dogs right now. And that helped drive some of the decisions we made around the technology that Jared chose to use. So snap cameras seemed to work pretty universally. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jared. There were some issues you were having with virtual background on some computers. Like this sort of helped point you in a direction, right, of what to use, because we of course couldn't require students to buy new computers or things like that. So
totally. And part of the reason why we decided that even backgrounds, of course we could answer that by doing virtual backgrounds in Zoom, but that's now two different vessels of design of using virtual backgrounds and snap camera. So that's why we decided, even if it was just a background with no mask, no foreground, anything, we would still be in snap camera, because that was just one train of thought for the actors. That was driven simply by the fact that we knew the actors were the ones who were going to be flipping things. So I didn't want to have them flip between 3 different softwares while they were also trying to tell a story.
We had, like I said in the beginning, we had sort of already gotten halfway through build, and we had, we didn't have obviously all the money in the world, which none of us has right now, but we were investigating whether we needed to send computers to people, because I believe right, Andy or Eamonn, one actor had a Chromebook, and that wasn't compatible.
That didn't work. Yeah.
I think it's a really, it's an important question just in general in terms of people's access to to internet, and it can't just be assumed that it's on the actor. I think that, at least in my perspective, it needs to be in the budget and prepared for it, to make sure that everybody can have the same access to that.
And something that I've been working with more and more now is just working with performers on their phones. Like, it totally is functional as, as a camera, as a Zoom enabled camera.
Okay, the next question is, Jared, do you know the film Wayne's World?
I do.
We're gonna answer that one live. Does anyone else have any other questions? If you have any questions, throw them in the feed. Andy or Eamonn or Jared, did you have any questions for each other as you both listened to each other's speak? Anything that popped out, or anything that you felt worth mentioning?
I'm curious.
Oh, sorry.
No, you go, Andy.
What was the performance like of your AR app? Was it really like? Did you find that some of the lower spec computers were having trouble running it, or was it pretty lightweight? Is it, if it's like cloud-based computing?
It's super lightweight. We actually found more processing error in the virtual background use in Zoom than in Snap Camera. And what you're seeing here, when I was doing it on this, let me just flip it on. It's really good, actually. Yeah. It like tracks perfectly, and we would find, we use spike tape inside everybody's office space so that they knew that it's really good, but I never thought it'd be on a USITT. Yeah, but like there are certain points in which it would turn off, and we would calculate that and then spike tape to know that that's out of range, so that we could have some fun with it. But it's like, for the amount of tracking efforts in Connect and like in other tracking hardwares and softwares. When this turned on, it was pretty remarkable. The upload time too was within a day. It's all usable, and you could do a push for an immediate use on Snap Camera once you've built it on Lens Studio. So we were able to flip through really quickly, and then in performance, I could tell the designer. And there was a question from Lori about costume designers. The costume designer designed this in a render, and then the media designer was the one who placed it into Lens Studio and uploaded it to Snap Camera and would tweak it in 3D space. And that was a great collaboration between them. And in performance, when we were in rehearsal, I would be messaging them and they would be updating it. And by the final scene in the show, it was updated. So wow. There was a really great turnaround at times. It's inconsistent. Like if nobody else is asking for updates at that time, it's a very quick turnaround. If there's like 5,000 people in the world asking for it, it's a little bit different. But I mean, that kind of responsiveness is like, it's like having a costume shop run on stage and tweak something and then run off without you noticing. So that was great. There is a question here. Can I answer this question? I'm sorry. The updates on software, we held everyone to Zoom 4.0 and told them no more updates when we were doing it because Snap Camera stopped working for any updates at like, I can't remember, 4.1. So I had 4.0. So I sent it to all of our actors and said, nobody update anymore, even if we're going to deal with a certain crap that isn't the best. I didn't want to keep, I mean, this is like rule number one for any technical design team, but once it worked, we didn't do any more updates and we rehearsed within that software.
We had to do the same.
We got really lucky for Mad Forest because the security update landed right after our performance closed, and all the clients would have had to update to the new platform if we did it that way. On the software side, yeah, I had to rewrite the entire program in a single night because of Zoom updating, mandatory updates. This is the name of the game.
There, I will say Zoom now, the 5.0, I am in, and it Snap Camera now works wonderfully. So,
but Cam Twist doesn't. Still.
Right. Yeah. Another software so Eamonn said Soundflower, which is great and works really wonderfully with Isadora. There's also Black Hole for people who are interested in other pipelines, just to put out a couple.
Jared, there's a question. Can you define media designer?
That's
in 3 words or
Eamonn,
less.
You can in 3 words or less. I think, well, to Eamonn's point earlier, something that's really exciting right now is for my whole career, I've, for any media designer who's been working to bring video design from a 2D space into a 3-dimensional performance space through the use of, pixels and whether it's through a projector or monitors. What's really interesting right now is it's flipped. Like now we're in a digital space, and it's the media designers that need to really respect and honor the sacredness of analog things to come in to enhance the story in a digital space. And I'm really excited for this moment, but I'm also really excited to get back to the analog space because I think there's going to be a different demeanor that's going to go on there because we are moving from the internet being a commodity to a necessity in order to spread ideas right now. And that shift is making everybody think differently about how to use it. And that's my experience as a media designer has been having to both innovate and pursue creative ideas while also educating the room about like what it is that we do. And I think that this is demanding that everybody have to figure out what it is that happens inside media design. And when we get back, I can't wait to tell stories on a stage again. And I can't wait for this to become its own really fascinating form. It's really cool to watch right now.
Yeah, I just speaking to that, we actually, partially because of this this project at the Fisher Center at Bard, we're now planning on having, we have this new platform called we're calling Upstreaming, and we're trying to plan for the fall, additional performances in this sort of realm. And so, I think I think it seems to me like, again, this is more of a conversation, maybe not this conversation, but for Eamonn and for Andy and for you, Jared, it was such an exciting sort of thing to sort of be on to making it up as you go along to a certain extent. Not really, but you know what I mean.
Well, and I think it's really important that we remember this type of process, because I feel like what it did was it brought everybody who was working on the piece up to speed with vocabulary and ability in a way that down the road in a year, there will be people who have experimented in it and people who have not. And it'll be equally as important to make sure that everyone's on the same level. What was really exciting about She Kills Monsters was I was learning Lens Studio in real time and Snap Camera in real time with students who aren't media designers. And they watched me use tools that I know in order to discover things. And that was much more accessible to them than me teaching media design in a class. Like, to watch us work together in that. And it was a good reminder of what teaching and education needs to be, because it's about grammar in order to get to poetry, but to have the opportunity to like learn both at the same time is a really important thing that we have to hold on to.
I think we're getting close to time, but I have one last question I'd like to pose to the group, which is if I am someone who's never done this before and I'm approaching my first live stream theatrical performance experience, where would you tell me to start? Like, what's the one piece of advice you would say about the technology or the streaming or whatever to start with?
I would say that something that we like, maybe on the very first Zoom rehearsal that we had for Mad Forest was a conversation about like what our roles were and what they are now and what skills are transferable. And the discovery in that rehearsal, because you know the stage vendor, everyone was like really apprehensive, and the performers especially. And I would say like in that rehearsal, there was this awakening that was like, oh, I'm doing a lot of the same things. I'm thinking about like cues and costume changes, and I'm thinking about like how to get from this moment to this moment in the play and storytelling, and to really, I think it's really important for a theater artist to think of this medium as something that is like directly transferable in terms of the skills that you already have.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's super helpful. And like I said, we're going to talk about, I think Jason mentioned, we're going to talk about roles and things like that in another conversation. I guess to qualify a little further, I'm thinking more specifically, if I have no idea how to go about streaming or anything technology based, like, is there some place you would point me to start? Is OBS the best, easiest route in? Like, what would you recommend in that regard?
I mean, yeah, I would say OBS is a great space. I would also say, like, don't get too caught up in crazy softwares. Like, you know, She Kills Monsters we started by just doing Zoom to OBS out. And through doing that, we discovered needs and then found some research and did more. I think if we went like macro in, it would have been really overwhelming really quick. And I think ultimately, like, what made our production, I would like to think what made our production most successful was like the human elements inside it that we had to discover by just limiting ourselves to Zoom, and then earning the right to do a couple of other things. And then it became really accessible and exciting. But Eamonn, yeah.
And the other thing that I would like to add is that like, because I like really started streaming, you know, not even a year ago. But, I mean, I was doing a lot of crazy stuff, but like I first touched OBS, you know, probably about a year ago. And the thing is that there's this vast streaming culture out there. It's mostly like a gamer. It's a very young culture, but it's also a very knowledge sharing culture. And so any question I would have, I would just like, you know, go to YouTube, and like some 15-year-old had made a video that, you know, told me exactly what I needed to know about the software. It's a very, the information is very accessible, I think.
Yeah, and to emphasize that, I didn't know OBS, Lens Studio, or Snap Camera until the first week of rehearsal of this. Like I hadn't used it at all, and there was more than enough information online for any question that I asked to get to a place where I feel like me and my students in the program are able to be flexible very quickly. Having an actual project made that much more educational, but but there's so much out there, and I just want to demystify that I came into this as a streaming artist because I had no idea what OBS was, but it's very there's a lot of documentation out there.
Cool. Thank you. If I don't get the chance to say it, Eamonn and Andy, thank you, and Jason, it was so great to hear about your experiences and how you did this. It's so cool that we kind of took different approaches and both had successful productions. So thank you for sharing and coming and joining us.
I'd like to echo that and also thank obviously USITT for and Christine for asking us to be here. And I would like to just do one little shameless plug that that we are actually doing another webinar. I mean, we are doing additional USITT webinars that everyone probably knows about, but Bard Fisher Center is doing a Mad Force sort of specific webinar tomorrow. And I'll put the link to that in the chat. That's actually gonna have a lot of most of the team, including a couple actors. So that's gonna really be more, not as technically, it's not about technical things, it's more about just the general process. So I'll put that in the chat. But again, thank you, Christine and USITT.
No problem. Well, our crowd are technical, are the technicians.
Oh, yes.
And the designers. Well, that was great, folks. Really great conversation. I can't thank you enough. Thank you, Jen, Jason, for agreeing to do this, getting Andy, Eamonn, and Jared on board. Folks, thank you again. Andy, thanks for those USITT conference plugs, and Jared and talking about going to the conference, and there's great sessions going on there too. And hopefully next March in Columbus, we'll all be there. I want to say just a really quick, I apologize for some of you who didn't get the links. That's another technology glitch. It's supposed to be automated. Some of you got the links and some of you don't, and I am not that person to speak on that subject. So that's one more thing to think about when you get registration going on to Zoom. Folks, I think we're just going to wrap it up for tonight. Again, we hope you enjoyed this session today, and we look forward to welcoming you back to another online education training in the near future. If you enjoyed today's conversation, remember that this was only part 1 in the series. We'll be hosting Jen and Jason again on Monday the 22nd for part 2, roles and expectations in online performance. And then again on Monday, June 29th for part 3, rehearsal and performance processes online. So a wealth of information coming at you from Jen and Jason and USITT. For those of you that signed on individually for each one of these sessions, I'd like you to please consider membership with USITT. After you join these 3 sessions, you'd already be about 33% your way towards full membership. And we hope you can consider that in the future. Once again, thanks for joining us today's webinar. On behalf of all of us at USITT, we wish you the best. Take care of yourselves, and remember to take care of each other. Enjoy the rest of your day, and good night. Goodbye, folks, and thank you.